German soldiers had a nickname for it, the flying tank. But when they first saw it, they laughed. It was big. Too big. It looked like a beer barrel with wings, slow, heavy, and ugly. In the skies above Europe, the German Luftwaffe believed only sleek, agile fighters ruled. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, elegant predators of the air. And then came this chunky brute from America, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. To the Germans, it looked like a joke. To American pilots, it was a promise. Because what the Germans didn't know yet was that this flying tank would soon turn their skies into a storm of fire and steel. In 1943, the war over Europe was a deadly chess match in the sky. The Luftwaffe ruled the air with their sleek Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, while American bombers, big, brave, and slow, were being torn apart on missions deep into Germany. The U.S. needed a fighter that could go the distance, one that could protect bombers all the way to Berlin and back. When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt arrived, nobody was impressed. Even American pilots thought it looked ridiculous, too fat, too heavy, too slow. It weighed more than 7 tons and drank fuel like a truck. The Germans mocked it openly, calling it the American Iron Pig. But what looked like a joke on the runway would soon become every German pilot's nightmare. The Thunderbolt carried a monstrous engine, a Pratt & Whitney double Wasp that could push it faster in a dive than anything the Luftwaffe had. Its thick armor made it nearly indestructible, and its 8.50 caliber machine guns could tear apart aircraft, tanks, and trains alike. At first, the Germans laughed when they saw it lumbering in the sky. Then they fired at it, and it didn't go down. Pilots returned from missions with holes in their wings, oil leaking, and smoke pouring from their engines, yet they still landed safely. Word began to spread through the Luftwaffe. The big one doesn't die. What started as a punchline quickly turned into a legend. The P-47 was no beauty queen, but it was built for war, not admiration. It could dive like a meteor, climb through clouds of flak, and bring its pilot home when no other plane could. Soon, the laughter faded. The Germans who once mocked the flying tank began to fear the thunder that followed it wherever it flew. The first time the Thunderbolt truly showed its power was in the hands of Lieutenant Francis Gabreski, a Polish-American pilot flying with the 56th Fighter Group, better known as Zemke's Wolf Pack. Gabi was sharp, aggressive, and brave enough to test the limits of this strange new machine. Early on, he realized something others hadn't. The P-47 wasn't meant to dance in the sky. It was built to strike like a hammer. While German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 could turn tighter, the Thunderbolt could dive faster than anything the Germans had ever seen. In a dive, it became unstoppable. German pilots learned this the hard way. They'd spot a P-47 and go after it, confident they could outmaneuver the heavy American plane. But when Gabi pushed the nose down, the jug, as pilots called it, dropped like a meteor. Its massive engine roared, the wind screamed, and the airspeed needle climbed past what most planes could handle. The Germans tried to follow, but their engines overheated, wings began to shake, and several simply broke apart mid-dive. Gabi would pull up, loop behind them, and unleash his 8 machine guns, 8 streams of thunder that shredded anything in their path. The P-47 could take damage that would kill any other aircraft. Pilots came back from missions with dozens of holes in their wings, chunks missing from their tails, oil pouring from engines, and they still landed safely. One American pilot even returned after taking cannon shells to his fuselage, his cockpit covered in oil, but the jug kept him alive. Word spread fast among Luftwaffe units. They began warning new recruits. Don't chase the fat one. It dives like the devil. Within months, the joke plane from America had become a sky monster, loud, heavy, indestructible, and always coming back for more. By 1944, the skies over Europe had changed. The P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer the newcomer, it was the hunter. Entire German squadrons began to fear the deep rumble of its engine long before they could even see it. The 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, had mastered the jug. Their tactics were simple but deadly: hit fast, hit hard, and disappear before the enemy could react. Colonel Hubert Zemke taught his men not to dogfight but to strike from above. "Don't turn with them," he'd say. "Crush them." The P-47 had the speed, the firepower, and the altitude to do just that. It could dive through German formations like a hammer through glass, spraying its 8.50 caliber guns in long, brutal bursts. Each gun spat out over 1,000 rounds per minute, turning the sky into a curtain of lead. 1 second, the Germans thought they were the hunters. The next, they were on fire, tumbling toward the ground. The Luftwaffe started losing veteran pilots faster than they could train new ones. Every mission drained their strength. But what truly broke their spirit wasn't just losing aircraft, it was realizing that the Thunderbolt pilots didn't flinch. They came in waves, fearless, armored, unstoppable. And then, the Jug's role changed again. When Allied troops landed in Normandy, the P-47 descended from the clouds and became the terror of the ground. It wasn't just a fighter anymore, it was a flying tank in every sense. It strafed German convoys, blasted tanks, and tore up railways with rockets and bombs. Soldiers on the ground could feel the earth shake when thunderbolts swooped down. German troops learned to dive for cover the moment they heard that low growl overhead. The same plane they'd mocked a year earlier was now raining destruction from the sky, changing the course of battles, one roaring pass at a time. As the war dragged on, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt became more than just a weapon, it became a legend whispered through the smoke of battle. Pilots who once doubted it now swore by it. They called it their Iron Guardian, their flying fortress, their last line between life and death. Many said the Jug could take a beating no other plane could survive. Stories spread of Thunderbolts limping home with half a wing missing, engine shredded, holes big enough to crawl through, yet still flying. German bullets that tore through lighter fighters simply bounced off its armored skin. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't graceful, but it was alive. And that mattered more than anything. On the ground, Allied troops learned to love that thunderous growl in the clouds. When pinned down by enemy fire, they'd look up and pray for that sound, the deep, angry roar of Pratt and Whitney engines rolling across the fields. Within moments, the sky would split open, and the P-47s would descend like avenging gods, rockets streaking, machine guns blazing, turning enemy positions into fire and dust. By the final months of 1944, the Germans no longer laughed. To them, the sight of a Thunderbolt meant only one thing: death was coming. The plane they had once mocked as too heavy to fight had become the most feared beast in the European skies. And when the smoke of war finally cleared, the numbers told the truth. The P-47 had destroyed more enemy aircraft, tanks, and trains than any other Allied fighter. It had done what no one expected. It outlasted the elegant Messerschmitts, outfought the sleek Focke-Wulfs, and helped hammer open the road to victory. The flying tank had become the storm that broke the Reich. When the war finally ended, and Europe lay in ruins, the P-47 Thunderbolt stood as a symbol of raw American grit, big, loud, and unstoppable. The same pilots who once cursed its weight now treated it like an old friend. Many even said, "The Jug brought me home when no one else could." Its massive radial engine had saved countless lives, absorbing hits that would have shredded any other fighter. Mechanics joked that if you gave a P-47 a runway and fuel, it'd fly through hell and come back with a grin. In Germany, captured Luftwaffe pilots spoke with a kind of grudging respect. One reportedly said, "We never feared the Spitfire. We feared the Thunderbolt. When it showed up, we knew the end was near." It was a strange irony. The plane that looked like a flying beer barrel had beaten some of the best aircraft ever built. Its power, toughness, and sheer will to fight made it a nightmare for the Axis and a guardian angel for the Allies. Long after the war, when jet engines replaced propellers and the skies moved on to new machines, the memory of the P-47 refused to fade. You could still hear old veterans talk about that deep, thunderous sound that shook the air, that meant hope was coming. Because the P-47 wasn't just another airplane. It was a flying promise that no matter how rough things looked, something strong and unbreakable was watching over you. The Germans had mocked it as a joke. But in the end, the joke was on them. Because the flying tank didn't just survive the war, it won it. Years after the war, when the skies were peaceful again and Europe began to rebuild, the legend of the P-47 Thunderbolt only grew stronger. At airfields across America, veterans would gather around old, restored jugs, running their hands along the riveted metal, remembering the days when this beast roared through smoke and flak. The old pilots would laugh, telling stories of how they used to dive at impossible speeds, feeling the plane shudder and scream, yet hold together every single time. "She was built like a tank," they'd say proudly. "And she flew like one too." Museums began to display the surviving Thunderbolts, often with small plaques describing their kill counts or missions. But the true stories, the ones that mattered, lived in the memories of the men who flew them. They remembered the cold dawn takeoffs, the roar of the engine echoing in their chests, and the silence that followed after landing, when they realized they'd made it back again. Every scratch on the fuselage, every bullet hole patched with sheet metal, told a piece of history, of courage, fear, and survival. Even in Germany, years later, historians and aviation enthusiasts admitted that the P-47 was an engineering marvel, not because it was elegant, but because it refused to die. It was the plane that kept flying when others fell. The plane that could take a direct hit and still bring its pilot home. And in a war where survival often came down to luck and steel, that meant everything. Today, when the last few P-47s take to the skies in air shows, people still stop and look up in awe. The sound, that same deep thunder that once rolled across the battlefields of Europe, still makes hearts pound. It's a sound from another time, a sound of strength, defiance, and victory. The flying tank may be a relic now, but its roar still reminds the world of the day when brute force met destiny, and won. Decades later, when younger generations asked their grandfathers what the war was really like, the stories about the P-47 always came up first. Not about medals, not about glory, but about survival. Many old pilots would look off into the distance and say softly, "If it wasn't for that plane, I wouldn't be here." They spoke of the moments when everything went wrong, when black smoke filled the cockpit, when the gauges went dead, when tracer fire lit up the sky like fireworks, and somehow, the jug still carried them home. They remembered the smell of oil, the vibration of the massive engine, and the strange comfort of knowing that beneath their feet was the toughest piece of machinery ever to grace the skies. Some pilots said they'd seen their wings shredded by flak, others told of gliding home on fumes, engine coughing, praying the runway would appear before gravity won. And somehow, it always did. The Thunderbolt had a heart, and it refused to quit. By the 1950s, when the U.S. Air Force moved on to jets, most P-47s were retired, sold, or scrapped. But a few lucky ones found second lives, flying in foreign air forces, patrolling borders, and even fighting small wars long after World War II had ended. Everywhere it went, the legend followed. People called it indestructible, a steel monster that refused to fade away. And maybe that's the truest thing about it. The P-47 wasn't beautiful like a Spitfire or famous like a Mustang, but it worked. It was proof that strength, not style, wins wars. That sometimes the ugliest thing in the sky is also the deadliest. Today, when you see one fly, it's not just metal and paint. It's a ghost, a reminder of the men who once rode thunder into battle, who faced death with courage and came home wrapped in the roar of a flying tank. Now, when historians look back on the air war over Europe, the numbers tell a story, but the sound tells the truth. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just dominate the skies, it owned them. It flew more than 500,000 combat sorties, dropped tens of thousands of tons of bombs, and fired millions of rounds that tore through enemy convoys, tanks, and trains. German troops learned to fear its distant growl long before they could see it. That low, rolling thunder meant chaos was seconds away. And it wasn't just a fighter, it was an air force's backbone. The Thunderbolt could dive at 500 miles per hour and still pull out, flattening targets that thought they were safe. It escorted bombers deep into German territory, took on Focke-Wulfs and dogfights, and then came down low to destroy tanks and artillery on the ground. Every role, every mission, the Jug handled it all. Even pilots of other aircraft admitted that when the P-47s were overhead, the battlefield felt different, safer, louder, unstoppable. General Eisenhower himself once said that the Thunderbolt was one of the weapons that won the war. And maybe he was right. Because while the headlines often go to the Mustangs and Spitfires, it was the Jug that did the dirty work, the long missions, the low strafes, the dangerous ground attacks that broke the enemy's spirit. It was the blue-collar hero of the skies. Built not for glory, but for getting the job done, again and again. And even after all these years, when you stand near one at an airshow and that massive radial engine starts up, the ground still shakes. The air still hums. And for a moment, it feels like time rewinds, like you're back over the fields of Normandy, the forests of Ardennes, the rivers of Germany, watching that flying tank climb into the clouds, ready once again to bring thunder from above.